at assessments of an individual's cardiovascular fitness and cardio capability. Okay, so lab number 4 is looking at a way of estimating your VO2 max. And if you remember from class, we talked about the fact that VO2 max is an often used measure of cardiovascular ability or capability, and we can use it as a percentage of that VO2 max as an intensity measure if we want to. Okay, so how do we get a VO2 max then to see whether or not we're getting fitter and more capable? So the first thing I want to remind you of is that VO2 max does a plateau. All right. So if I've been doing a lot of anaerobic work, or if I've been low active, then when I start to do some cardiovascular training, we see an improvement in VO2 max, right? And it does this. But eventually, it's going to stop improving and plateau out, okay? And this plateau is genetically determined. So for some individuals, you know, it may be up here, and for others, it could be, you know, down here. And so that's not something I can change within a little range here. Okay, so when we look at the VO2 max of someone like Lance Armstrong, even though he was caught cheating by using substances that are not allowed, he still put in the work, and he still is a physiological phenom, right? His VO2 max is insane. So, you know, people who are excellent at endurance activities, right, have higher genetic ability for oxygen use than people who are just average, right? So what we want to do, though, is to be able to measure or at least estimate VO2 max to see where we're standing. Are we improving? Have we hit our plateau? And when we're trying to do that, we've got a continuum of assessments that we can use. Okay, so my lowest level of assessment is the one that we're going to use today, is lab 4. And so what we have here is a non-exercise VO2 max. Okay? So think about what just the title tells you. Okay? If I'm not moving, right, then I'm not really testing my body's capability for using oxygen because I'm at rest. Does that make sense? Okay. So this would be the least accurate estimate that you could use. Okay. Does that make sense? So when might I use a non-exercise VO2 max estimate? Which population, perhaps, might I use this for?
it on elementary school students, maybe?
Possibly. I mean, although you can get elementary school students to do exercise tests. Who might it not be safe for? Let's word it this way. Who might it not be safe for to run an exercise test?
The elderly?
Right. Elderly would be a good choice. Yeah. Who else? Mackenzie, are you trying to say something?
What about people with health problems?
Yes, absolutely, right? So if we've got an individual who has very high blood pressure or is very overweight or obese, right? Then we don't not pre-assess them because they're not healthy. We just have to use more careful measures, right? So if I'm working with someone who's severely overweight, right, then I might use a non-exercise VO2 max test when I first start working with them. And then after a few weeks of doing some maybe slow walking, at the trail or walking or biking on the equipment in the gym, then I can do another non-exercise test on them, and hopefully their VO2 has improved a little bit and they're feeling more comfortable. Perhaps they've lost a couple of pounds, and maybe we can move into an exercise version of a VO2 max assessment. Does that make sense to people?
Yes.
Right? So my next level on my continuum would be an exercise estimate for VO2 max. Right? And now we've got quite a lot of choices. Okay? If we have done enough work and this person has put forth the effort to improve their cardiovascular health over 2, 3, 4 weeks, right? Then we have lots of choices, and the further we move to the right on the continuum, the more accurate. It's still an estimate of my VO2 max, but the more I'm moving, the more the estimate is closer to reality, right? So here, I have some choices, and level 1, not surprisingly, right, would be a walk test. Okay? And if you go to the useful resources folder on the lab website, I have a copy of a walk test up there for you, because we don't have a walk test in our book. Okay? And then we would do a walk-run test. So one of the ones that we're going to do later in the semester is a walk-run. So you're encouraged to go as fast as you can, but you don't have to run the whole thing if you're not fit enough to run the whole thing, right? So it depends on your fitness level. Okay. And then out there, and I have not got a copy of that, I should get a copy of that. There are ultimately run tests, there are ergometer tests, so a cycle test. There's also, I believe, there's a rowing machine test. And so then, once you get to this level, you would pick the test that most aligns with the kind of activity that the individual is doing. All right? So, you know, if, because what the research indicates is that if you take someone who's a competitive cyclist and you do a run VO2 max test with them, they won't reach the same level of VO2 max that they reach on a cycle test, right? And that's down to specificity of motor unit use and things like that we've been talking about in class, right? So, same with a rower, right? I'm not gonna get the most accurate VO2 max for a rower on a running test. Okay? All right. And then we have our lab test, so a stress, oops, not it's called stress. A stress test in a lab. Right? And here, again, you have options. Do you do it running, cycling, rowing? Okay? But here you're going to be in a lab, hooked up to a computer. You're going to have a mouthpiece in that has a tube that goes to the computer, so the computer can analyze oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. And it's all very sophisticated and complicated, and then at the end, the computer will tell you what your VO2 max is. And that's like the most accurate way of testing VO2 max. But for most of us in our world, we're not going to have access to that. So unless you're an athletic coach at a university, that has either an exercise physiology lab or a biology lab, like we have our most ex-phys type faculty member is in the biology department, that's Dr. Barlow. So some of you have worked with him, okay? And he has the setup to run a true VO2 max test in his lab, right? And we have, I've spoken with him. He's gonna, last semester he ran one and filmed it for us, and so that you guys were able to watch a video of what that test looks like. He's thinking he might run a fresh one, so I'll give him a week or two to see if he can get that done, and then we'll have a video for you to watch for that. All right, so today you're going to complete lab 4, and you're going to get a value for your truly guesstimated VO2 max. Okay, so that's today's, or one of today's labs. All right. Later in the semester, we're going to do a walk-run test, okay? And then you'll have an exercise version that you can compare back to your non-exercise version and see the difference. And then, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to do a true lab. You'll have to watch that one. But that's unfortunate, but at least you'll get to see it and see what it really looks like. Okay? Any questions on lab 4? So there's there's nothing for you to do. Oh, I see a question down here. Hold on. Type 2 diabetics, yes, Mackenzie, that would be a good population, unless they have been being physically active before they get to you, in which case you might do the walk test. If they've been very sedentary and they're overweight, then yes, the non-exercise test would be a good choice to start off with. So there's nothing to film this week because you're just going to complete the equations for Lab 4. You have to kind of estimate if you are doing aerobic work, you have to estimate how long you've been doing that for. So I would say any length of time where you've been consistently doing something that is aerobic, not anaerobic, unless you've got some aerobic training in your anaerobic work, right? So any length of time where you haven't had a break for more than 3 or 4 months, right? So for some of you, that might be all the way back to when you were 10 years old, okay? Depends on when you started your training. All right? So you have to decide whether you're an untrained individual or an aerobically trained individual, complete the appropriate set of equations, right? Or you could do both and see, but I think you could do both of them and then see which one matches your exercise VO2 max the most closely, right? Up to you. I'm expecting one, okay? And then there's a comparison chart for you. Questions on Lab 4? No? Okay. The other lab today is also looking at a measure of aerobic capacity. All right? So the other lab is, lab number 10, is a non-exercise estimation of ventilatory threshold. Okay? And it's really important here that you read the background piece, because ventilatory threshold is an approximation of lactate threshold. And when we covered lactate threshold in class, we talked about the fact that really lactate threshold is the true measure of your aerobic ability. But the problem with looking at lactate threshold is it involves a blood draw all the time, right? And that's a nuisance, among other things. So ventilatory threshold is a way you can estimate your lactate threshold without taking a blood draw, basically. All right? Now, let me have a look, because I know I found exercise versions. Yes. Okay, and again, in the same place in the lab notes, if you go to the useful resources folder, at the bottom of that list is a document that gives you some exercise field tests to estimate ventilatory threshold. Because again, the workbook does not have one of those. It just has this non-exercise version. Okay? So if you're interested in looking at your lactate threshold, it's always better to do anything to do with oxygen. It's just so far off accurate if you're not moving, right? So the field tests will be a lot more useful for you if you want to do that kind of work on yourself. or with your athletes, or I wouldn't probably worry about lactate threshold with recreational people or with PE students unless they're competing. But I guess it depends how detailed you want to get into the training programs, right? Who am I working with? What's appropriate? So these are ways, both of these labs tie back to aerobic metabolism, right? What's my capacity for aerobic metabolism and aerobic work? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. So no film to take this week, just the 2 worksheets to complete. The ventilatory threshold will take you all of 30 seconds to do, which is why I would recommend, let me see if I can pull this document up and show you this. So it's a similar idea, right? The non-exercise version is going to be the least accurate, which is why I pulled up this other document. So this is from the American Council for Fitness, I think that's their title, or American Council on Exercise. Yeah, and so what they've got is some a submax torque test, right? So here you would, I think they're going to be walking on this, yeah, walking or cycling. So you've got different versions depending upon who your individual, your client, or your population are. The arm ergometer one is really useful if you're working with someone who is disabled and in a wheelchair, or has really bad arthritis in their hips or their knees and they can't do the walking or cycling. The arm ergometer is a backup for that kind of population. So there's always, it's always worth thinking, not testing, not assessing really should not be the option, right? You always want to assess. Otherwise, you can't be completely sure how much improvement this individual is making, and you can't be completely sure how well your program is working, right? So not assessing isn't the option. Just keep digging until you find the appropriate assessment, all right? What else do we have here? Oh, and then they've got an OBLA test. We didn't talk much about OBLA in class, right? But that information is there for you on Blackboard. I would print it off, add it to your workbook, because these assessments are going to come in really handy when you are out in the field doing your jobs. Okay? Questions? Any questions? Does it make sense how it ties back to the working class? Right? With oxidative phosphorylation, with energy system number 3. It's also going to tie into the muscle fiber type that we've been looking at and the motor unit types. So if I am someone that has a lot of slow motor units and a high ratio of type 1 fibers, I'm going to do well on VO2 max tests. Right? Because those fibers are much more able to use oxygen, and VO2 max is my threshold for using oxygen at the cellular level. Does that make sense? Okay, so you've got plenty of time here to get those done. If I were you, I would just do them straight away now, get them done and get them submitted. But I will not be shutting. I'll set the assignment tab up now for the worksheet, and that'll be open for whenever you want to add it in. But don't put it off too long, because you'll end up not getting things done and then overloading yourself later in the semester. All right? Okay, well, have a lovely rest of your day. I'll see you tomorrow to finish off muscle fibers. Okay? Week 6 already. Do I